The little girl was only 4 years old. She didn't know what the Mafia was. She didn't know what it meant to be the Chicago crime boss. She knew only one thing. Her mother lay on the cold kitchen floor, eyes closed, not moving. And beyond the window, the snow kept falling while no one came. Her small hands trembled. Tears blurred the screen of the phone she held. She pressed 3 numbers the way her mother had taught her, but her finger slipped. Not 911. A photograph flew out instead. A clumsy line of text filled with spelling mistakes. My mama fell PLs, help she not waking up. And it landed straight on a phone that had been silent for 5 years. A phone no one in the underworld dared to call. That night, on the 42nd floor in the heart of Chicago, a man read that message. He had ordered men killed without blinking. He had walked through fire without turning his head, yet the image of a woman lying unconscious on the floor of a poor kitchen made his hand stop halfway to his glass of whiskey, because he recognized that kitchen. He recognized the faint scent of jasmine still lingering in his memory, and he realized that the child who had sent the message had the same eyes he saw every day in the mirror. What happened after that changed the lives of 3 people forever. If this story has touched you, press like so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs to believe that love always finds its way home. And subscribe to the channel, because the most beautiful stories we always save for you. 6 hours before everything changed, apartment 4B was as cold as it was every night. The heater had been broken for 3 weeks. Lena Ashford knew that the way she knew everything about poverty, quietly, without complaint, the way a person accepts a wound that never fully heals. She pulled the thin blanket up over her shoulders and coughed. The cough was deep and raw, dragging from her chest to her throat as if someone were scraping the inside of her lungs with sandpaper. That cough had lasted all week, but she didn't see a doctor. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because between medicine and milk for Bria, it wasn't a choice. It was arithmetic, and arithmetic always won. The small kitchen carried the thick scent of chicken porridge and old wood. On the gas stove, a pot simmered quietly. The 3rd time that week she had tried to cook something warm for Bria. 3 times. Because the 3 times before that she had gone without eating so her daughter could have her share. On the counter, bills were stacked on top of one another like a silent indictment. Final notice. Final notice. Final notice. 3 envelopes. 3 reminders. 3 different ways of saying she was drowning. Lena was 28 years old but felt 60. Her bones ached when the weather shifted. Her hands trembled when she held a spoon. And every morning when she woke, she needed 30 seconds to convince herself that the day was worth getting out of bed for. Not because she wanted to give up, but because her body had given up long ago, and only her will had stayed behind. And that will had a name. Bria. Mama, why are you coughing again? Bria stood in the bedroom doorway, holding her old stuffed rabbit named Button by one worn ear. She was smaller than she should have been for her age, thinner than other 4-year-olds, but her eyes were large, alert, and missed nothing. Gray-blue eyes. Not Lena's color. The color of someone else. Someone Lena didn't allow herself to think about. The child looked at her mother the way children look at things that frighten them, intently, quietly, pretending not to be afraid. I'm fine, sweetheart. Lena smiled. That smile cost her. It took something from inside her. A small remaining piece of resilience she had already scraped nearly empty. But she smiled anyway, because it was the only thing she could still give her daughter that didn't require money. Bria didn't believe her, but she nodded. 4 years old, and she already knew how to nod at the lies adults told. That should have made Lena cry. But she hadn't had tears left for things like that in a long time. On the refrigerator door, held in place by a star-shaped magnet, there was an old photograph. In it, Lena was laughing, truly laughing. Young, hair lifted by the wind, eyes bright, skin flushed with life. Beside her stood a man, but the right half of his face had been cut away. Cleanly, neatly, with scissors, not torn, cut, as if Lena had sat there for a very long time, very carefully removing half of that person from her life, yet couldn't bring herself to cut him out completely. She never threw the photograph away, and she never looked at it whole. It simply hung there, in the cold kitchen, among the overdue bills, like a scar she carried on the wall instead of on her skin. Bria had asked once, Mama, who is the man whose face is cut off? Lena hadn't answered. She had only smoothed her daughter's hair and said, Go to sleep, baby. Bria didn't ask again. But whenever her mother wasn't looking, the child would stare at that photograph for a long time. At the half of the man's face that remained, the left side, one eye. And sometimes, in dreams she never told anyone about, Bria saw the other half of the face, and it looked exactly like the eyes she saw every morning in the mirror. At the same time, on the other side of the city, 42 floors above the ground, Josiah Crane stood before a wall of glass that stretched from floor to ceiling, his hands clasped behind his back, watching sleet lash against Chicago, as if the city had committed some unforgivable sin and the sky was punishing it. His penthouse was large, beautiful, and cold. Intentionally cold. Not because the heating system was broken like in apartment 4B on the south side, but because Josiah Crane chose the cold. Emotion was a luxury he didn't allow himself. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because in his world, emotion was an opening, a place for a blade to slip in, the thing that killed a man faster than a bullet. He was 37 years old. He controlled half of Chicago, 12 districts, 4 shipping routes, 2 senators in his pocket, and an army that didn't need uniforms. He gave orders with a nod. He ended things with silence. And for 5 years, no one had seen anything behind those gray-blue eyes except darkness. On his desk sat 2 phones. The first, black, rang constantly. Messages from Cade, from captains, from men who knew him only through commands and fear. The second lay beside it, older. A small scratch marked the upper left corner of the screen, and it was silent. Silent for 5 years. Josiah never turned it off, never replaced the battery, never deleted the contacts. He never explained to anyone why that phone remained on his desk every day, charged every night, as if he were keeping something alive that had long since died. Cade knew. Cade was his bodyguard, 33 years old, quiet, efficient, loyal in a way that didn't require an oath. Cade knew the phone existed, but Cade didn't ask, because Cade also knew there were questions that, if answered, would reveal a part of Josiah Crane the entire underworld wasn't permitted to see. The door opened. Cade stepped in without knocking. The northern shipment. Josiah didn't turn around. Handle it. Cade paused for a beat, then left. The door closed. The penthouse fell silent again. Josiah lifted his glass of whiskey, turned it slightly, watching the light pass through the amber liquid, then set it down. He didn't drink. He looked out at the glass wall, snow falling, and memory arriving uninvited. 5 years earlier, morning, he had woken to an empty bed beside him, not empty as if she had risen early, empty as if she had never been there at all. No letter, no message, not a single explanation. Only the pillow still indented with the shape of her head, and the scent of jasmine. Jasmine clinging to the sheets, to his hair, even to his hands when he gripped the white fabric, not understanding what was happening. Lena Ashford had vanished as though she had never existed. Josiah searched. 6 months. With every resource available to a crime boss. With connections ordinary men would never touch. No trace. No signal. Nothing. Then he stopped. Not because he had run out of ways, but because he reached a conclusion. If she wanted to disappear from his life, if she chose to leave, then he had no right to drag her back, even if he could. Even though every night during those 6 months he sat on the bed where she had once lain and breathed in what remained of the jasmine scent until it faded completely. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He did something worse than both. He buried it, deep, careful, cold, until that pain turned to stone inside him. And the version of Josiah Crane that existed after that morning was the version Chicago learned to fear. But in the drawer of his desk, beneath papers and weapons, there was a dried jasmine flower, pressed flat, brittle, nearly breaking if touched too hard. He had kept it for 5 years, and the old phone on his desk, the one that had been silent for 5 years, was still charged every night, as if he were waiting, even though he would never admit that he was. 11:47 at night. Lena was standing at the gas stove, a spoon in her hand stirring a pot of porridge that had already cooled by half, when her legs simply gave out. There was no warning, no cry, no dramatic fall the way it happens in films. Her body simply decided it had endured enough, and it let go. Her knees buckled first, then her hips, then her shoulder. The pot slipped from the stove, hot liquid splashing across cracked tiles, the spoon clattering and rolling beneath the cabinet. Lena lay on the freezing kitchen floor, eyes closed, her chest rising very faintly, very slowly, as if her breath were considering whether it should stay. Bria woke because of the noise, not the sound of the pot hitting the floor, but the silence that followed. The wrong silence. The kind of silence a 4-year-old cannot name but feels in her bones, like a small animal catching the scent of danger in the wind. She sat up in bed, gripping Button by his worn ear, her bare feet touching the cold floor. She walked toward the kitchen. Each small step creaked against the wooden boards in the night. Then she saw her mother. Lena lay on her side on the floor, brown hair spread into the spilled porridge, one arm stretched out as if reaching for something she would never touch. Eyes closed, face pale beneath the yellow light. Bria stood in the kitchen doorway and stopped breathing for 3 seconds. Not because she was afraid, but because her world, a world made only of her mother and Button and this small kitchen, suddenly tilted, and she didn't know how to hold it upright. "Mama," her voice was tiny, smaller than the drip of water from the leaking faucet. No answer. "Mama." Louder this time. Bria knelt down, set Button aside, and pushed at her mother's shoulder with both small hands. Pushed with all the strength a 4-year-old body could give. Lena didn't move. Her chest still rose, but faintly, distantly, as if her mother were somewhere very deep and couldn't hear her daughter calling. Her mother's skin was hot. Wrong. Hot in a dry way, a burning way, the kind that made Bria's hand pull back on instinct. Bria stood up. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. There wasn't time. She remembered. Her mother had taught her this. If something bad happens, you call this number. 9, 1, 1, 3 numbers. She had practiced. Repeated them in her head like a song. Bria grabbed her mother's phone from the kitchen counter. The counter was too high. She had to stand on tiptoe, fingers searching across the cold surface until they found the phone. She unlocked it with the 4 digits she had watched her mother press 100 times. But her hands were shaking too much, and her tears blurred the screen. Blue-white light from the phone lit her small tear-soaked face, and her finger slipped. Not the calling app, but WhatsApp. She didn't know the difference. 4 years old. To her, a phone was a phone. The top contact appeared, a small square photograph. A man with sharp features, cold eyes, a rigid jaw. Bria didn't know who he was. Didn't know why this number sat at the top of her mother's phone. Didn't know that Lena had kept that number for 5 years, never calling, never deleting it, like keeping a door she had locked from the inside but couldn't throw away the key to. Bria pressed it. She took a photograph of her mother lying on the floor. Yellow light, spilled porridge, hair spread out, eyes closed. Then she typed with one finger, slowly, letter by letter, the way she had just learned her alphabet. "My mama fell PLS. Help she not waking up. Send." The image flew across the city in silence, through the snow, through 42 floors, and landed on the phone resting on Josiah Crane's desk, the phone that had been silent for 5 years. The phone charged every night, though no one ever called. It lit up. Josiah was standing by the glass wall, his back turned. He heard it. Not a ring, but the faint vibration of the phone against wood. In 5 years of silence, that sound was thunder. He turned, looked at the screen. A message, from an unknown number. He opened it. The photograph filled the display. A woman lying on a kitchen floor. A poor kitchen. Yellow light. Brown hair spread out. And Josiah Crane, the man who had buried every emotion so deep it turned to stone, looked at that image, and his heart did something it hadn't done in 5 years. It stumbled. Another message came. "She's still not moving." "I'm scared." Josiah set his glass of whiskey down on the desk. Slowly. He didn't drink. And for the first time in 5 years, his hands were not entirely steady. Josiah set the phone down, then picked it up, then set it down again. He walked to the glass wall, watching the snowfall, watching the city lights burn below, as if 42 floors of height might help him see more clearly what was happening inside himself. Wrong number. Not his concern. A strange child. A strange woman. A poor kitchen on the south side. He had no reason to care about. He told himself 3 times. And 3 times, he picked up the phone and looked at the photograph again. That kitchen. That yellow light. Something in the image wouldn't let him put it away. Not the woman lying on the floor, because he hadn't yet seen her face clearly. It was the kitchen. the way the yellow light brushed the wall, the way a pot of porridge had spilled across cracked tile. It stirred something in him, something familiar he couldn't name, like a scent drifting through a dream and vanishing before it could be recognized. The door opened. Cade stepped in, saw Josiah holding the old phone, and paused for exactly 1 beat. In 33 years of living and 6 years at Josiah Crane's side, Cade had never seen him hold that phone with an expression like this. Not anger, not sorrow, something more primitive. Something Cade didn't have words for, but instinct told him this wasn't the moment to ask. Josiah spoke without turning around. "Where is this number registered?" His voice was normal, flat, but it was the kind of flat Cade had learned to recognize, the flatness that comes just before a storm. Cade pulled out his own phone, fingers moving quickly. 15 seconds. Southside. Low-income housing complex. Englewood District. Cade looked up. "Boss, it's just a child. Wrong number. I know what it is." Silence. "Check if an ambulance was called." Cade studied him, not in defiance, but the way a man who had followed his boss through gunfire, through blood, through sleepless nights, looks and wonders what he is seeing in that photograph that I am not. But Cade didn't ask. Cade acted. 2 minutes later he returned. Ambulance arrived. The woman's name is Lena Ashford, 28 years old, single mother, acute pneumonia, complicated by severe infection, admitted to St. Mercy General, and the child has no one to claim her, no father on record, no reachable relatives. A neighbor is holding her temporarily but has already contacted Child Protective Services. Josiah listened. Each detail fell into the silence like stones dropping into a deep well. Lena Ashford, that name. He heard it, and nothing moved across his face, but his fingers tightened around the phone until his knuckles turned white. "Prepare the car, Josiah. Now, Cade." Cade left quickly. Josiah remained alone. He looked down at the photograph once more. The woman on the kitchen floor, dark brown hair, and he wondered, with something deeper than reason, whether it could be her. He shook his head. Impossible. 5 years. She had vanished. She had chosen to leave. It couldn't be her. Yet his hands were not steady as he stepped into the elevator. The black car stopped in front of St. Mercy General at 12:32 in the morning. Josiah sat in the back seat. He didn't get out. Snow gathered on the windshield. Hospital lights cast a pale blue-white glow across his face. 11 minutes. He sat there for 11 minutes. Cade in the driver's seat, silent, not asking, not urging, because Cade understood that whatever was happening inside Josiah Crane at this moment was larger than any deal, larger than any territorial war, larger than anything he had witnessed in 5 years beside him. Josiah told himself he was only here to verify information, to tie up a loose end, to ensure the mistaken message could not be traced back to him. That was all. He was lying to himself, and some part deep inside, the part he had buried for 5 years, knew it. If at midnight your phone received a plea for help from a strange child, would you answer? Leave your honest answer in the comments. At the 12th minute, Josiah opened the car door and stepped out into the snow. The lobby of St. Mercy General carried the thick scent of antiseptic and stale coffee. Cold, white fluorescent lights poured down the length of a long corridor, reflecting against tiles that had once been bright but had long since yellowed with time. Josiah stepped through the main doors, dark coat, no tie, collar turned up against the snow. He looked like a dangerous man trying to appear ordinary, and he failed completely. Every nurse he passed glanced at him and then quickly looked away, not because he did anything, but because something in the way he walked, the way he looked, the way the air around him seemed a few degrees colder, made people move aside on instinct. He found the child in the pediatric waiting area. Bria sat on a blue plastic chair, her feet not touching the floor, rabbit-patterned socks on her small heels, the pair Lena had bought at a thrift store 2 months earlier, because the girl had stared at them without blinking for 5 full minutes. Button rested on her lap, one worn ear draped across her knee. Bria's eyes were swollen red. Tear tracks still marked her cheeks. But she wasn't crying anymore. She had passed that stage, 4 years old, alone in a hospital near 1 in the morning, and she had already decided that crying didn't help, so she stopped. That shouldn't happen to any child. Josiah stopped 3 steps away from her, and Bria looked up. What made him freeze wasn't how small she was, wasn't that she was sitting there alone. It was that her eyes held no fear, not even a trace. She looked at him as if she had sent a message into the dark and known someone would come. And he had. That simple. You came. 2 words, her voice small, slightly hoarse from crying, but calm enough that something struck a place inside him he hadn't guarded. Not his chest, not his mind. Somewhere deeper, somewhere he had built walls around for 5 years and believed unreachable. You sent me the message. He spoke carefully, as if handling something he had no experience handling, and that was true. Josiah Crane had handled weapons, betrayal, death. He had never handled a 4-year-old looking at him with absolute trust. Bria nodded. I don't know who you are, but your picture in Mama's phone looked okay. She tilted her head. But in real life you look different. Meaner, and despite everything, despite the cold hospital and the hum of fluorescent lights and her mother lying somewhere behind doors she wasn't allowed through, something almost moved across Josiah's face. Not a smile. Josiah Crane didn't smile, but something closer to one than he had permitted himself in 5 years. He sat down on the plastic chair beside her. The chair creaked under his weight. They sat side by side, a 37-year-old mafia boss and a 4-year-old girl with a worn stuffed rabbit. The fluorescent lights hummed. The corridor was empty. Snow still fell beyond the glass doors. Bria didn't ask who he was, didn't ask what he did, didn't ask why he came. She simply sat there, and after a moment, leaned slightly toward him, just slightly, as if her body decided he was safe before her mind had time to think. Is Mama going to be okay? She asked him. I don't know, Josiah answered. He wouldn't lie to a child. Bria was quiet for a moment, thinking seriously in the way only children think seriously, without filters, without politeness, just pure truth. Then she lifted Button and held him out. You hold him. He helps. Josiah looked at the rabbit. One ear worn thin, Button eyes, stuffing flattened at the belly. He reached out and took it. Bria frowned. Not like that. You have to hold him like a baby, not like a ball. Josiah Crane, the man the Chicago underworld didn't dare look in the eye, adjusted the way he held a stuffed rabbit under instruction from a 4-year-old. Bria nodded, satisfied. Yes, that's right. Then she looked at him, and Josiah looked back. For the first time he truly met her gaze under the white fluorescent light, and what he saw made him stop breathing. Gray-blue eyes. Not just any gray blue. A specific gray blue. Familiar. Exact. The eyes he saw every morning when he shaved in the mirror. His own eyes, on the face of a 4-year-old child holding a worn stuffed rabbit in a hospital at 1 a.m. Josiah didn't allow the thought to fully form. Not yet. He forced it down, pressed it deep, the way he had pressed down every dangerous thing in his life. But the seed had already fallen. And some seeds, no matter how deep you bury them, still grow. They wouldn't allow Bria to see her mother until morning. Hospital policy, visiting hours, the kinds of rules adults invent to keep the world orderly, without ever asking what a 4-year-old sitting in a corridor thinks about such things. Josiah should have left 3 hours earlier. He was still here. Bria had fallen asleep against his arm at some point he couldn't pinpoint exactly. Perhaps around 2 a.m, after she had finished telling him everything about Button, about how Button was afraid of the dark but not afraid of spiders, about how her mother made the best porridge in the world, but this week Mama had been coughing too much, so it didn't taste as good. She talked and talked and talked, the way children talk when they are afraid but don't want to admit they are afraid, so they fill the silence with everything they have. Then her voice grew smaller, smaller, and stopped. Her head grew heavy on his arm. Button wedged between them, one worn ear brushing the sleeve of Josiah's coat, and Josiah Crane, who controlled half of Chicago, sat motionless on a hospital plastic chair, not daring to move, because he was afraid of waking the child. Afraid. He was truly afraid. A man who had walked through burning warehouses without blinking, who had sat across from a gun aimed at his head without his pulse rising, was now afraid to shift his arm because a 4-year-old, who weighed less than 15 kilograms, was sleeping against him. His phone vibrated continuously inside his coat pocket. He felt each vibration through the fabric. 7 messages from Cade, 2 from captains, 1 from the senator whose campaign he quietly funded. He ignored them all of them, because none of those messages mattered as much as holding still so this child would not wake. He didn't understand why that mattered to him. He didn't allow himself to understand. But his body knew. His body stayed rigid, solid, like a wall the child could lean against without fear it would collapse. He looked down. Bria slept with her mouth slightly open, One braid had loosened, a butterfly hair clip dangling from the last strand. Her breathing was slow and even, the way children breathe when they feel safe. Completely, absolutely, without reservation. She trusts too easily, he thought. Then another thought came, from somewhere he didn't control. Or maybe she trusted the right person. Memory arrived uninvited, not the memory of the morning Lena vanished, but what he did afterward. When 6 months of searching ended, he sat alone in his penthouse, opened the drawer, and looked at the jasmine flower Lena had once worn in her hair. The last flower she left behind. He had pressed it flat between 2 sheets of white paper, the petals dried and fragile, nearly breaking if touched too firmly, yet still holding their shape, still holding their scent. Faint, almost imagined, but enough for him to close his eyes and see her dark brown hair and her smile in the morning light. That flower was still in his desk drawer. 5 years, beneath papers and contracts and the artifacts of the life he lived now. But it was there, always there, like the old phone, like the way he charged it every night, like the way he waited without admitting he was waiting. Bria shifted in her sleep. Her hair fell across her face, and Josiah, with the hand that had signed orders to erase entire trafficking rings, the hand that had closed around a traitor's throat without trembling, lifted that hand and brushed her hair aside, awkwardly, his fingers too large, too rough, too hard for this, as if his hands had been designed for guns and contracts, not for a child's hair. But he did it, slowly, carefully, light enough to almost not touch at all. Bria didn't wake, but she smiled in her sleep. Around 3 a.m. she murmured, her voice soft and distant as if from the far side of a dream. Mama has a picture. Josiah didn't move. Of a man. Mama never lets me see his face. But sometimes Mama holds that picture and cries. Silence. Long. Heavy. Josiah stared at the white wall opposite him. His jaw tightened. His eyes did not blink. But his hand, the one still resting on the child's hair, trembled. Just slightly. So faint that even if Bria had been awake, she wouldn't have noticed. But he knew. At the end of the corridor, Cade appeared. He stood there, eyes widened within careful control, looking at the scene before him as if he couldn't quite believe it. Josiah Crane sitting on a hospital plastic chair, a strange child asleep against his arm, a worn stuffed rabbit wedged between them. Josiah glanced once in his direction. Just once. But it was enough. Cade disappeared down the corridor as quickly as he had come. And in St. Mercy General, at 3 a.m, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the scent of antiseptic and the snow falling beyond the glass, something Josiah had buried for 5 years shifted beneath the soil. He felt it move, like roots pushing through concrete, slow but unstoppable. Morning arrived gray and soft, as if Chicago understood this wasn't a day meant for sunlight. The doctor said Lena was stable. Serious, but stable. Acute pneumonia, complicated by untreated infection. At least 2 weeks in the hospital, high-dose antibiotics, and the kind of rest she had never allowed herself. When the nurse opened the hospital room door and said Bria could go in, the child didn't walk. She ran. Ran on small feet in rabbit-patterned socks across the polished hospital floor. Button swinging in her hand, straight to her mother's bed. Bria took Lena's hand in both of her tiny ones and held on tight. She didn't cry. She had cried enough the night before. Now she only held on. Held as if letting go would mean her mother would once again be lying on the cold kitchen floor, unmoving. Lena opened her eyes slowly. The world returned in fragments. White light, hospital ceiling, the scent of antiseptic, and small hands gripping hers. Her eyes searched for Bria first. Instinct. Always Bria first. And when she saw her daughter, Lena's face did something language doesn't have enough words to hold. Relief, love, the fierce, desperate, feral love of a mother who had almost not been there anymore. The kind of love you only feel in its full weight when you have stood at the edge of losing it. My love. Lena's voice was hoarse, broken, thin as paper. But enough. Bria heard and squeezed tighter. Then Lena's gaze shifted to the doorway, and everything stopped. A man stood in the frame. Dark coat, no tie, leaning slightly against the door frame, not stepping in, not stepping out, as if he were standing on the border between 2 worlds and didn't know which one he belonged to. 5 years changed many things. Changed Lena's body from healthy to thin and worn down. Changed her life from a woman in love to a single mother surviving one day at a time, changed his face, harder, sharper, colder, marked by 5 years at the head of the underworld. But 5 years hadn't changed his eyes, those gray-blue eyes, the way he stood, as if the entire room belonged to him without his needing to enter, the way the air around him felt heavier, denser, as if gravity bent more strongly near him than anywhere else. Lena recognized him immediately. Not a second required. Not a closer look needed. Her body knew before her mind could process it. Her heart struck hard once, then forgot the next beat. The monitor beside her bed skipped in response. "Josiah," she whispered. No sound. Only her lips moved, but he read them. And Josiah Crane, standing in the hospital doorway, looking at the woman on the bed, with an IV in her arm, and eyes widening as she woke, recognized her. The woman from the photograph on the kitchen floor. The woman he had searched for 6 months. The woman who vanished 5 years ago and left only the scent of jasmine on his pillow. It was Lena. Lena Ashford. Time froze. Not as metaphor, but truly froze. No one breathed. No one moved. The monitor beeped steadily in the background, like a clock counting seconds. Neither of them knew how to fill. Lena's eyes held 10 things at once. Fear, panic, confusion, and deeper than all of it, deeper than fear, deeper than 5 years of running and hunger and loneliness, something she had tried to bury but that refused to die. Longing. She had missed him. She had missed him every single day for 5 years. Every time she looked into Bria's gray-blue eyes and saw his there. Every night when the apartment was too cold and she curled on the bed, she missed his warmth. Every time she held the photograph with half the face cut away and cried, she missed the other half. Josiah stood in the doorway, frozen as well, because in all the scenarios he had imagined in 5 years, in every reason he had given himself for keeping that old phone charged each night, he had never truly prepared for this moment, the moment she was real. Not memory, not the faint scent of jasmine from a dried flower, but her, flesh and bone, thinner, more fragile, but her. Bria looked back and forth between the two adults with gray-blue eyes they both recognized, and she didn't understand why the entire room had fallen silent. But she understood one thing. "Mama, this is the man I texted. He came." Her voice was clear and simple, unaware that those words had just shattered 5 years of silence between two people standing 3 meters apart, yet separated by an abyss. Lena looked at Josiah. Josiah looked at Lena, and the world tilted, and neither of them could find the words to set it straight. The nurse led Bria downstairs to the cafeteria for breakfast. The child didn't want to go. She clutched her mother's hand and shook her head, her loosened braids swaying with the motion. But Lena stroked her hair and said, "Go on, my love. Mama is here. Mama isn't going anywhere." Bria looked at her mother, looked at Josiah standing in the doorway. Then she nodded, picked up Button, and followed the nurse out. The door closed, and the white hospital room suddenly felt much smaller. Josiah stepped inside, closed the door behind him. Not hard, just a gentle push, a quiet click, and the outside world was locked away. Only 2 people remained, the scent of antiseptic, the steady beeping of the monitor, and 5 years of silence so heavy the air itself seemed to thicken. Lena spoke first. She had to speak first because if she let Josiah ask, she wouldn't have the courage to answer. "I didn't leave because I wanted to." Her voice was hoarse, weak, but each word placed carefully, like setting stones on a table one by one. Josiah stood 3 steps from the bed. He didn't sit, didn't come closer. His face didn't change. Not at all. But Lena knew him. She had known him in a time when he allowed someone to know him, and she saw what no one else in the world could see. His jaw tightened for 1/10 of a second before settling again. Then why? 3 words. Flat. But beneath that flatness, Lena heard 5 years calling her name in the night with no answer. "Someone threatened me." Lena spoke slowly, each word like a shard of glass she had to lift with bare hands. "Someone very close to you. Very familiar. I can't say the name. Not yet." Josiah didn't move. His eyes never left hers. "What did they say?" "I can't say the name." "Josiah, they said what?" His voice remained flat, but it was the flatness of a lake before a storm, the kind of flat Cade would recognize and instinctively step back 3 paces from. Lena swallowed. The IV line trembled with her hand. "They said if I didn't disappear, they would kill me." A beat. And kill the baby. Josiah blinked, for the first time since entering the room. What baby? Not because he didn't understand, but because he needed to hear her say it. Needed to hear it in her voice. Needed it to be real. Lena looked straight into his eyes, her brown eyes meeting his gray-blue ones, the eyes she had seen every day for 5 years on her daughter's face. Bria is your daughter, Josiah. Silence. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The monitor beeped. Beep, beep, beep. Steady, cold, indifferent, while Josiah Crane's entire world had just been lifted and turned upside down. His daughter, the 4-year-old child who had fallen asleep on his arm last night, the child who had taught him how to hold a stuffed rabbit, the child with gray-blue eyes he had seen and had known from the first moment under fluorescent light, but had refused to allow himself to believe. His daughter, 4 years old, 5 years. 5 years he had sat in a penthouse 42 floors above the city, drinking whiskey alone, charging an old phone every night, keeping a dried jasmine flower in his drawer, believing Lena had chosen to leave. 5 years his daughter had grown up in an apartment without heat, eating thin porridge, wearing secondhand clothes, holding a worn stuffed rabbit, and watching her mother cough on a cold kitchen floor. 5 years his daughter had slept without a father, and he hadn't known. Josiah looked toward the door, the direction Bria had gone. The white door closed tight. Behind it, somewhere in the hospital cafeteria, his daughter was eating breakfast alone with a stuffed rabbit and calling him Mister. He turned back to Lena. Her eyes were red. She was waiting for him to say something, waiting for him to shout, waiting for him to break something, waiting for a reaction she had imagined 1,000 times in 5 years. He didn't shout, didn't break anything. He did nothing at all. He simply turned and walked out of the room, not because of anger, not because of disappointment, but because if he stayed one more second in that room, in front of her, he would shatter. And Josiah Crane didn't know how to shatter in front of anyone. He had never been taught. He walked down the corridor, through the lobby, through the glass doors. Snow still falling. Cade stood by the car, saw his face, and said nothing. Josiah got into the back seat, closed the door. Silence for 3 seconds. Then he slammed his fist into the dashboard. Once. Hard. Hard enough that the plastic cracked and his knuckles split open. Cade sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead, not moving, because Cade understood that whatever had just happened inside that hospital wasn't something a question could fix. Josiah sat there, hand bleeding, snow gathering on the windshield, thinking about a 4-year-old girl with his eyes sitting alone in a hospital cafeteria, holding a worn stuffed rabbit. His daughter, 5 years he hadn't known she existed. 5 years she had grown in the cold while he sat at the top of the city believing he was the one abandoned. If you discovered you had a child you never knew about for 5 years, what would you do first? Leave your answer in the comments. He told himself each visit would be the last. On the first day after learning the truth, Josiah sent Cade to bring food to the hospital. Real food, not the pale rice and gray meat the hospital called lunch. Chicken porridge from the shop on the north side he knew was the best in the city. Warm bread, fresh milk for Bria, unsweetened orange juice for Lena. He told Cade to leave it at the front desk and go. No need to meet, no need to go in. Just logistics. That was what he told himself. On the second day, he brought it himself. Only because Cade was busy. Not for any other reason. He set the bag on the table beside Lena's bed. Didn't look at her. Didn't say anything except one short sentence. The child needs to eat on time. Then he saw Bria sitting on her mother's bed, legs folded, button on her lap, trying to draw with a pencil worn down to a stub the nurse had given her. She was drawing on the back of a discharge form because there was no paper. On the third day, he brought a box of 48 colored pencils. He told himself he bought them because it was on the way. Bria opened the box, and her eyes lit up in a way Josiah had never seen anyone look at colored pencils, as if she had just been handed the universe wrapped inside cardboard. On the fourth day, Bria made him sit on the floor and draw with her. The man who controlled half of Chicago sat cross-legged on a hospital floor, legs stretched out, back against the wall, an orange pencil in a hand almost as large as Bria's entire palm. The child gave orders. Draw a rabbit. Josiah drew. Bria studied the picture for a long time, tilted, her head left, then right, then looked at him with the most serious gray-blue eyes a 4-year-old could possess. Mister, is that a rabbit or a potato with ears? On the hospital bed, Lena made a sound. Small, quick, almost inaudible. But Josiah heard it, because he remembered that sound. 5 years ago, Lena had made that same sound when she tried not to laugh and failed. He didn't look up, but the corner of his mouth moved. Slightly, briefly, then was gone. Bria didn't accept potatoes with ears. She took the pencil from his hand, placed a new sheet of paper in front of him, and began to teach. Seriously, patiently. First draw a circle. A real circle, not crooked. Then 2 ears, long upward, not sideways. Josiah Crane. The man 12 districts feared. The man senators addressed with careful respect. Sat on a hospital floor learning how to draw rabbit ears from a 4-year-old. And he learned slowly, awkwardly. His lines trembled because his hands weren't designed for colored pencils. They were designed for guns and contracts. But he tried, and Bria nodded with satisfaction like a teacher watching a student improve. Yes, that's better. It looks more like a rabbit now. The following days passed that way. Josiah came. Told himself it was the last time. Then came again the next day. He and Lena began to talk, briefly, carefully. Each sentence placed gently like walking across frozen water, unsure where the ice might crack. He asked about the past 5 years. Lena told him, piece by piece, and each piece lodged in him like a blade she didn't mean to drive in, but that cut him all the same. She told him about working 3 jobs at once, washing dishes in the morning, cashier in the afternoon, cleaning office floors at night. About nights she came home at 11 and found Bria asleep on the sofa waiting for her, button on her chest, the television still on. About the time Bria had a high fever and she didn't have money for the hospital, so she sat in a bathtub of warm water all night holding her child, singing lullabies with a voice shaking from fear. About standing in a grocery store staring at a can of formula, counting coins in her pocket, then putting it back because she was short 25 cents. Josiah listened to every detail and said nothing, but his jaw tightened more and more. His fingers dug into his knees until his knuckles whitened, and in his eyes, deep behind the ice the underworld believed was all there was, something burned. Not anger at Lena, anger at himself. Anger at 5 years spent 42 floors above the city, while his daughter walked through rain and snow to daycare. And anger at the one who had made all of this happen. The one Lena still hadn't named. On the 7th day, Bria finished a special drawing. She had worked on it for 2 days, hiding it, covering it, not letting anyone see. Then she handed it to Josiah with both hands, solemn as if presenting a state document. 3 figures, a small one in the middle, a woman with long hair on the left, a very tall man with a serious face on the right. Beneath them, in red crayon, scrawled with misspelling but so clear it hurt. "My family, that's us," Bria declared. Josiah looked at the drawing. For a long time, 3 uneven, bright figures in crayon, and the word family missing the letter I, yet somehow more complete than any word he had ever read. "You put me in the wrong picture," he said softly. Bria tilted her head. "Wrong." He didn't answer. He folded the drawing, carefully, slowly, as if folding something more valuable than any $1,000,000 contract he had ever signed. Then he slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. On the hospital bed, Lena watched. She didn't speak, but her eyes softened. For the first time in 5 years, her eyes softened when she looked at him. On the other side of the city, inside an office where the lighting was always golden like candlelight, though it was the 21st century, Mikhail Volkov sat behind a black oak desk and read the report in his hand for the 3rd time, 52 years old. Silver hair slicked back, pale gray eyes, cold, the kind of eyes belonging to a man who had lived long enough to know that loyalty was only a tool and affection only leverage. He had once been Josiah's advisor, mentor, the man who taught Josiah Crane how to transform from a hot-headed young man into the crime lord Chicago bowed to. And he was also the man who decided Josiah needed to be colder, harder, lonelier, in order to keep the throne Mikhail had helped him build. One of Mikhail's men stood before the desk, head lowered. Josiah Crane had gone to St. Mercy General 4 times in the past week, visiting a woman named Lena Ashford and a child. Mikhail didn't move, but the fingers holding the report tightened, slightly, enough to crease the paper. Lena Ashford. That name. 5 years ago, Mikhail believed he had erased that name from Josiah's life as cleanly as wiping ink from white paper. He remembered clearly, every detail, because Mikhail Volkov did everything with intention, and he never forgot the things he deliberately set in motion. 5 years earlier, Josiah had begun to change, not dramatically, but Mikhail saw it. Josiah began coming home earlier, began laughing more, began softening in places a crime lord wasn't permitted to soften. And it all started when that brown-haired girl appeared, Lena Ashford, 24 at the time, bright eyes, easy laughter, and loving Josiah in the most dangerous way Mikhail could imagine, loving him truly, not for money, not for power, loving the man himself, the part of him Mikhail had spent a decade trying to erase. Mikhail saw the problem before it became a problem. She was making him weak. A crime lord with a weakness was a dead crime lord. And if Josiah died, the empire Mikhail helped build would die with him, so he handled it. Not with a gun, with something far more effective. Fear. One night, when Josiah was away, Mikhail went to Lena's apartment, knocked, entered, sat down across from her calmly, politely, as if he had come for tea, and said, "If you do not disappear within 24 hours, I will kill you." Lena looked at him, not trembling. Not yet. Then Mikhail added, in the gentlest voice he possessed, "And I will kill the baby in your womb." Lena had only just learned she was 2 months pregnant. She hadn't told Josiah yet. And Mikhail, through his network of information, knew before she did. You will vanish. You will never contact him. Never. And Josiah will never know the child exists. In return, you and the child will live. Lena trembled so badly she couldn't hold her glass of water. But she nodded, because the 2-month-old life inside her, the life she had only just discovered, suddenly mattered more than her own survival, more than Josiah, more than love. She nodded and disappeared that night. The next morning, when Josiah woke to an empty bed, Mikhail was the first to call. "Boss, I hear she left." His voice carried just the right amount of concern, just the right degree of surprise, an artist of deception. It seemed she couldn't handle this life. Josiah believed him. Why wouldn't he? Mikhail was his mentor, the man he trusted most, and that lie held its shape for 5 years, lying still like an unexploded bomb, until now. Until a 4-year-old sent a message by mistake. Mikhail set the report down on the desk. 5 years he believed everything was finished. 5 years he sat across from Josiah at every meeting, every dinner, every decision, carrying that lie in his breast pocket like a knife he believed he would never need to draw. But Lena had returned. And if she opened her mouth, if she told Josiah who had come to her apartment that night, Mikhail would lose everything. Power, position, and very possibly, his life. He lifted the phone, dialed, his voice calm, always calm. "We have a problem." The woman has resurfaced. Silence on the other end. Mikhail glanced at his watch. She is hospitalized. About 10 days until discharge. Resolve it before she leaves the hospital. If Josiah discovers the truth first, none of us will have anything left to resolve. He ended the call, placed the phone back on the black oak desk, and sat motionless in the golden light, considering how to use a woman and a 4-year-old child as leverage, with the serenity only men who sold their souls long ago possess. Mikhail had spent 5 years building a lie, and a 4-year-old, with a borrowed phone, had begun tearing it apart piece by piece. He would not allow a child to finish the work. Josiah didn't ask Lena again about the name. He knew she wasn't ready. He saw the way her eyes shifted when she mentioned the night 5 years ago, the way her shoulders curled inward as if her body remembered the fear before her mind allowed it. He wouldn't force her, but he would find out. Because Josiah Crane wasn't the kind of man who waited for answers. He was the kind who went and took them. He gave K-Day one task. Find out who went to Lena's apartment the night before she disappeared 5 years ago. Every security camera, every record, every trace. Cade nodded and vanished. Cade didn't ask why. Cade never asked why. And while Cade turned over every stone in the past, Josiah kept coming to the hospital, every day, every afternoon, telling himself it was the last time, then sitting on the floor drawing rabbits with Bria again, then staying until the child fell asleep. And the conversations between him and Lena, once short and cautious, began to lengthen. Not because they trusted each other more, but because 5 years of silence was too heavy, and once they started speaking, it was hard to stop. That night, Bria slept on her mother's bed, curled like a kitten, button beneath her head. Josiah sat on the plastic chair beside the bed. Lena lay on her side facing him, IV still in her arm. The room lights were off, only pale light from the corridor slipping through the narrow glass panel in the door, and Lena told him about the night she gave birth to Bria. I went into the hospital alone. Her voice was soft, low, careful not to wake the child. The cheapest hospital I could find, a shared room with 3 other women. No one held my hand. Josiah didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead at the white wall, at the dark. But he listened. Every word pressing into places he thought had turned to stone long ago. She was born at 3 a.m. Lena paused, breathed, crying without tears, the kind of crying that comes from someone who has dried out but whose body still remembers the motion. She cried so loud enough to wake the entire room. I laughed and cried at the same time because she sounded exactly like you when you're angry. The same voice, the same force, as if she was born carrying a piece of you I thought I had lost. Josiah didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened, not softened like ice melting to water, softened like a concrete wall developing a crack. Just one, small, but once cracked, it could never be sealed the same way again. He reached out, slowly, very slowly, as if he feared that moving too fast would make her disappear again, and he placed his hand over hers, just placed it there, not gripping, not squeezing, just resting his large, rough hand over her thin one on the white hospital sheet beside their 4-year-old sleeping child. The first time in 5 years, Lena looked at his hand over hers, then up into his eyes, and she didn't pull away. She let it stay, and they sat in the dark, silent, with the steady beeping of the monitor and the soft breathing of Bria, their hands touching for the first time in 1,825 days. Then Josiah did something he hadn't planned. He slipped his other hand into his coat pocket and took out something small, thin, fragile, a dried jasmine flower, pressed flat, its petals almost translucent under the faint corridor light. The flower he had kept in his desk drawer for 5 years. Today he had brought it with him. He didn't know why. Or he did, but wouldn't admit it. Lena saw the flower and stopped breathing. Her eyes reddened. Not from illness. From 5 years believing he had forgotten. 5 years believing he had thrown away everything of hers and moved on. And the brittle jasmine in his hand told her he hadn't moved on. Not one day. You kept it, she whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The flower answered for him. The next morning, Bria woke with tangled hair. She sat up, yawned, saw Josiah in the chair beside the bed, and her face lit the way sunlight does, natural, effortless, without permission. "Mister, my hair's a mess," she said, voice still heavy with sleep. Josiah looked at her tangled hair, then at Lena. Lena gave a slight shrug, half a smile on her lips, as if to say, "You handle it." He stood, took the small comb from the bedside table, and began trying to comb Bria's hair. His hands large, rough, clumsy, fingers used to holding guns, signing contracts, gripping the throats of enemies, completely unfamiliar with tiny hair ties and the soft hair of a 4-year-old child. He fumbled. The elastic slipped. He tried again. It slipped again. Bria patiently instructed him, serious as a teacher guiding a slow student. "You have to twist it first, then pull it up, Daddy," she said, then froze. Her eyes widened. "I mean, Mr. Josiah. I said it wrong." The room fell silent. Lena on the bed held her breath. Josiah sat behind Bria, the elastic still looped around his finger, and he heard it. "Daddy." She had almost called him Daddy before correcting herself, and nothing changed on his face. But his hands paused for one beat, just one. Then he continued tying her hair, slow, awkward, but steady. And Bria didn't turn to look at him, though her ears flushed red. Josiah's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Cade. He stepped into the hallway. Answered. And Cade's voice on the other end, calm but with something tightly held beneath it, said 4 words. "Boss, I found something. You're not going to like it." Cade delivered the report inside the car. Not in the penthouse, not in the office, because he knew what he was about to say needed to be spoken where no one else could hear it. The black car sat parked in a private garage, overhead lights off, illuminated only by the glow of the tablet screen, Cade positioned against the partition between the front and back seats. Security footage. 5 years ago. The building where Lena had lived. Grainy black and white images, but clear enough. 11:43 at night. A man entered the building. Silver hair, long coat, a gait Josiah recognized even through blurred pixels, because he had watched that walk for 10 years, in every meeting, every dinner, every major decision of the empire he built. Mikhail Volkov. Cade continued. Financial records show Mikhail paid a network that specializes in making people disappear. False documents, new addresses, erased trails. The transaction occurred exactly 2 days after Lena vanished. The amount matches. The timeline matches. Everything matches. Josiah sat in the back seat, silent, the tablet screen still glowing, frozen on the frame of Mikhail stepping through Lena's doorway, and Josiah stared without blinking. The silence inside the car wasn't ordinary silence. It was the kind Cade had learned to recognize over 5 years beside him. The silence before someone pays a very high price. Josiah took out his phone, the old one, called Lena. She answered on the second ring, her voice soft, slightly alarmed, because Josiah never called at this hour. He said only one sentence. The man who threatened you. Was it Mikhail? Silence on the other end. Long, heavy. He heard Lena breathing, heard the monitor in the background, heard Bria shift in her hospital bed. Then Lena said one word. Yes. Josiah ended the call, gently. Too gently for what was burning inside him. He sat still for 10 seconds, looking at the tablet screen. Mikhail Volkov, his mentor, the man he trusted most, the man who sat across from him every week for 5 years, looked into his eyes knowing Lena hadn't left by choice, knowing he had a daughter growing up in the cold, and still raised a glass of whiskey to toast his birthdays as if nothing had happened. 5 years. 5 years he believed he had been abandoned. 5 years he buried love into stone. 5 years his daughter ate thin porridge and wore second-hand clothes, because of a man who sat 3 meters from him in every meeting and called him boss. Josiah spoke, voice flat, very flat. So flat Cade felt the temperature in the car drop. Bring Mikhail to the warehouse. Tonight. Cade looked at him through the rearview mirror. Boss. Tonight, Cade. Cade nodded. Started the engine. But the story didn't end there. Because on the other side of the city, Mikhail Volkov wasn't a man who sat still waiting to die. He had survived 52 years by always having a contingency. And his contingency began 3 days earlier, when he first learned Josiah was visiting the hospital. Mikhail's men were already inside St. Mercy General, 2 of them, posing as night janitors. They knew which floor Lena occupied, knew the back corridors, knew which security shifts were weakest, and they were waiting for instructions. Mikhail sat in his golden-lit office, phone in hand, calculating. If Josiah discovered the truth and acted first, he would need leverage. And the best leverage, the only leverage, was the woman and child in that hospital room he had quietly positioned watchers around for 3 days. He didn't want it to come to that. Not because of conscience. Mikhail Volkov had sold that long ago. But because using Josiah Crane's daughter as a hostage would be the largest gamble of his life. If he won, he might survive. If he lost, Josiah wouldn't just kill him. Josiah would erase him from history. But Mikhail had no other choice left. He lifted the phone, called the man at the hospital. Do not move yet, but be ready. If I call again tonight, you take the woman and the child out of the hospital. Fast, quiet, no trace. He ended the call. And at opposite ends of the city, 2 men prepared for the night ahead. One moving toward the truth, one running from it. And in a 3rd-floor hospital room, Lena held Bria as they slept, unaware that darkness was approaching from both sides. 2 in the morning, Lena woke to the sound of footsteps. Not the footsteps of a nurse. Nurses wore soft shoes, walked quickly, evenly, familiar rhythms that belonged to healing. This sound was different, slower, heavier, and it stopped directly outside her door. Lena didn't move. Her eyes opened, but she kept her body still, her breathing steady, as if she were still asleep. 5 years of living in fear had taught her many things. It taught her how to recognize when the air in a room shifted. It taught her how to tell the difference between ordinary footsteps and footsteps with intent. It taught her that a mother's instinct is never wrong, and that instinct was screaming now. She glanced toward the frosted glass panel in the door. A shadow stood in the hallway, motionless, watching the room, watching her bed, watching Bria curled beside her, button clutched tightly against her chest. Lena didn't wait. She didn't wait for someone to come, didn't wait to be saved, didn't wait for anything except the instinct that 5 years alone had forged into steel. She sat up, pulled the IV from her arm, fast, decisive. The needle slid free, blood beating along the back of her hand, pain shooting up her arm, but she didn't look down. There wasn't time for pain. She lifted Bria into her arms. Her body was weak, her hands trembled. The pneumonia hadn't fully healed, and she had just torn out her IV mid-treatment. But when Lena Ashford lifted her daughter, when her thin arms wrapped around that small body, she was stronger than she had ever been in her life. Bria stirred in her sleep. "Mama." "Shh, I'm here. I've got you. Go back to sleep." Lena's voice was calm, completely calm, not a tremor in it, because Bria must never hear fear in her mother's voice. Never. Lena carried Bria to the farthest corner of the room from the door, wrapped a blanket around her, placed Button back into her arms. Then she turned, locked the door from the inside, a small latch, weak. It wouldn't withstand a hard kick, so she did more. She shoved the hospital bed, heavy, metal, wheels screeching against tile. She pushed with both hands, with the full weight of her body, with the kind of strength that appears only when your child is in the corner and a stranger's shadow stands outside the door. The bed jammed against the frame. Not perfect, but enough to buy time. Lena grabbed her phone, called Josiah. He answered before the first ring finished, as if he hadn't been asleep, as if he had been waiting for her call without knowing he was waiting. "Josiah, Mikhail's men, at the hospital. Right now, outside my room." Her voice didn't shake. Fear was there. Weakness was not. Lena Ashford had survived 5 years alone with a child in an apartment without heat on the south side of Chicago. She had pushed a grocery cart at 11 at night with Bria asleep inside it. She had sat in a bathtub all night holding her daughter when her fever reached 104 degrees, without money to call a doctor. She had survived everything. Life hurled at her with her bare hands. She wasn't someone who needed saving. She was someone who had saved herself for 5 years. Josiah said 2 words. 8 minutes. Then he hung up. Lena stood in the center of the room, her back to the corner where Bria lay, her face toward the door, the iron bed between her and the shadow in the hallway. She stood there. No weapon, no strength left. Nothing but the pure will of a mother protecting her child. And she waited. 8 minutes. The longest of her life. Outside the door, the shadow shifted. Then another joined it. 2 of them. They murmured something she couldn't hear. The handle turned. The door pressed against the metal bed and stopped. It wouldn't open. Silence outside. Then the handle turned again. Harder. The door rattled. The bed held. Lena didn't step back. Bria woke in the corner. "Mama, it's okay. I'm here. I've got you." The same words. The same calm tone. Because a mother is the last wall between her child and the world. And this wall doesn't fall. The 7th minute. Fast footsteps in the hallway. More than one pair. Heavy. Then Cade's voice, cold and clipped, like metal striking metal, and the 2 shadows outside the door vanished, quickly, silently, as if they had never been there. Josiah appeared at the door 15 seconds later. He looked at the bed wedged against it, looked at the IV torn from Lena's hand, blood streaking across the white sheet, looked at Lena standing in the center of the room, hair loose, face pale, but her eyes fierce. The eyes of a lioness standing at the mouth of her den. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask because that question would have been an insult to what she had just done. Instead, he said, "You handled it." Not praise. Recognition. Seeing her exactly as she was. Not a victim. Not someone needing protection. But a warrior. A warrior who had fought alone for 5 years without anyone knowing. Lena looked at him. Her eyes wet but her voice dry. "I've been handling it for 5 years." Silence. Josiah nodded, and for the first time, he truly understood. Lena Ashford didn't need him to rescue her. She had rescued herself from the night she walked out of that apartment 2 months pregnant without looking back. He turned to Cade standing in the hallway, and his voice then was the coldest Lena had ever heard, colder than the snow outside the window, colder than the penthouse 42 floors above the city. "Find Mikhail. There are no more chances." Lena heard those words, and she didn't object, because she understood this world. She had survived in it. The warehouse by the Chicago River. 2:45 in the morning. Wind from the river slipped through the seams of the iron doors, cold as a blade. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its dull yellow light swaying with the draft, dragging shadows back and forth across the concrete floor like a restless tide. Mikhail Volkov sat on a wooden chair in the center of the warehouse, his hands unbound. Kade stood behind him, silent as a shadow. 2 of Kade's men guarded the doors. Mikhail wasn't tied because there was no need. He knew he had nowhere to run, and because Josiah wanted him comfortable, wanted him to look straight into his eyes when they spoke, wanted him to understand this wasn't an interrogation. This was a verdict. Josiah entered through the side door. Dark coat, empty hands, no gun, no knife, nothing at all. He didn't need them. His presence in that cold warehouse was weapon enough. He stopped 3 meters from Mikhail, stood there, silent, studying the man who had taught him everything he knew about power. Mikhail met his gaze, pale gray eyes calm, almost sorrowful, because Mikhail Volkov was an artist of expression, and even now he selected the face best suited for the moment. Josiah spoke. "Tell me why." Not a question. A command. And Mikhail, though old enough to know when silence might serve him better, chose to speak, because he believed in his reasoning. Truly believed. "She made you weak." His voice was calm, nearly gentle, as if explaining something to a child. "I saw you change when she appeared. You went home earlier, laughed more, lost focus. A crime lord with a weakness is a dead crime lord. I did what was necessary to protect you, to protect everything we built." Silence. The bulb swayed. Josiah looked at Mikhail without blinking. Then he spoke. Slowly. Each word laid down as carefully as loading a bullet into a chamber. "You decided I wasn't allowed to have a daughter." Mikhail froze. The calm mask cracked for a single second, but it was enough. He hadn't known Josiah knew about Bria. Not until now. "You know," Mikhail said, "not a question anymore. I know. I know she didn't leave by choice. I know you threatened to kill her and the baby. I know you paid to erase her trail. I know you sat across from me every week for 5 years knowing my daughter was growing up in an apartment without heat on the south side while I sat 42 floors above the city, believing I had been abandoned." Josiah stepped closer. Very close. Close enough that Mikhail could smell snow on his coat. "She gave birth alone." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but each word struck the warehouse walls and echoed back. "My daughter ate thin porridge, wore secondhand clothes. Her mother nearly died on a cold kitchen floor. And you sat 3 meters from me in every meeting, knowing all of it, and never said a word." Josiah wanted to kill him, despite demanded it. 5 stolen years. 5 years his daughter grew up without a father. 5 years Lena lived in a hell he never knew existed. All of it could be paid for with a single bullet. A nod to Cade. 10 seconds. Finished. But he thought of the drawing. 3 crayon figures. Uneven. Bright. The words "my family" missing the letter I. The paper was in his coat pocket now. He could feel it through the fabric. Thin and light, yet heavier than anything he had ever carried. And he thought of Bria. Gray blue eyes. Her small voice saying "Mister." Her tiny hands teaching him how to draw rabbit ears. She had drawn him into her family, and he didn't want to become the kind of father his daughter would one day fear. Didn't want to be a man with fresh blood on his hands on the same night his daughter had almost called him daddy. Josiah stepped back. Strip him of everything. His voice cold but steady. Power, territory, contacts, all of it. Lock him away. And if I ever see him again, I won't be this version of myself. Kade moved forward. 2 men took Mikhail by the shoulders. He rose to his feet, and before they led him out, Mikhail Volkov turned back, looked at Josiah, and spoke in the last calm tone he possessed. "You think this changes who you are. You're still you, Josiah. And she'll see that. Soon enough. Like last time." Mikhail was taken away. The iron door slammed shut. The warehouse fell silent. The wind still slipped through the cracks. The bulb still swayed. Josiah stood alone on the cold concrete floor, and Mikhail's final words lodged inside him like a nail, not because he believed Mikhail, but because he feared Mikhail might be right. Mikhail Volkov was stripped of power and locked away, but he wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat without dragging someone down with him. Before Cade let him out, before the iron warehouse door slammed shut, Mikhail managed to issue one final order to the men he still had outside. A message, sent to Lena's phone. And when Lena opened that message the next morning, a fresh IV newly placed in her arm, Bria sleeping beside her. What she saw made her forget the pain entirely. Files, photographs, documents, names, dates. Everything about Josiah Crane that Lena had once known only in shadows but had never seen proven. Arms trafficking, drug routes, money laundering across 12 districts, names that disappeared without anyone asking why, sentences never reaching a courtroom because judges received envelopes instead, and photographs. Photographs of Josiah with men whose faces said enough. Photographs of warehouses, of docks, of things Lena never wanted to imagine but no longer had to imagine because they lay before her, sharp and undeniable on the screen. And beneath it all, one single line. "Now you know exactly who your daughter's father is," Lena read, page by page, image by image, the IV still in her arm, her finger sliding across the phone screen slowly, so slowly, as if each movement stripped away something she had just begun to believe in again. She had known who Josiah was. 5 years ago she knew the world he lived in. But knowing in fragments, knowing by instinct, knowing by the scent of gunpowder clinging faintly to his coat when he came home late, was different from seeing black and white evidence laid bare before her. Vague knowledge allowed hope. Proof did not. When Josiah arrived that afternoon carrying a bag of food and a new box of colored pencils for Bria, he saw Lena's eyes and knew. He knew before she spoke, because those weren't the eyes that had softened when he folded Bria's drawing and slipped it into his coat. They weren't the eyes that had filled when she saw the dried jasmine flower. These were eyes he had seen on many faces over many years when people looked at him and finally saw what he truly was. Leave. Lena's voice trembled, but it wasn't weak. It trembled with anger, with fear, with disappointment in herself for beginning to believe again. Lena, you're Mafia, Josiah. You sell guns. You sell drugs. People disappear because of you. She pushed herself more upright in the hospital bed despite the pain in her chest. My 4-year-old daughter texted you. My child accidentally reached out to a crime lord, and you sat in this room with her as if that were normal. Josiah didn't speak. He stood there holding the food bag and listened. I fought too hard to keep her safe. Lena's voice rose, but she didn't shout. She didn't shout because Bria was in the corner clutching Button. Wide gray-blue eyes moving between the two adults, understanding more than anyone allowed her to. I was sick. I was poor. I was alone, and I survived all of it. I pulled out my own IV. I barricaded the door. I protected my child with my bare hands. I don't need you for that. And I didn't survive everything just to let a man like you come near my daughter. The room was very quiet. The monitor beeped. Beep, beep, beep. Josiah looked at Lena, then at Bria in the corner. The child hugged Button, gray-blue eyes wide, and on her face was something no 4-year-old should ever carry, the understanding that something good was breaking apart. Josiah placed the bag of food on the table. Slowly, carefully. His hands weren't completely steady, but he forced them to be. You're right, 2 words. Then he turned and walked out. No explanation, no apology, no pleading. Because everything Lena said was true, and he had known it before she spoke. He walked down the hallway toward the elevator, and from behind him, small and fragile and shattered, Bria's voice followed. Mr. Josiah. He didn't turn around. He kept walking, each step heavier than the one before. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, turned to face the corridor, and in the brief second before the doors closed, he saw Bria standing at the end of the hallway, Button dangling from one hand, the other hand lifted, as if reaching for something already disappearing. The doors shut. Josiah stared at his reflection in the steel, cold, distant, exactly what Lena said he was. He told himself this was the right ending. He almost believed it. 3 days. 3 days of silence. Josiah returned to work. Meetings, decisions, orders, moving money and men like pieces on a board. Efficient, precise, untouched. He didn't take Bria's drawing out of his pocket. He didn't need to, because he saw it without looking. 3 crayon figures, uneven, bright. The words, "my family" missing the letter I, yet more complete than any $1 million contract he had ever signed. It remained in his coat pocket. He didn't throw it away, didn't take it out to look. It simply stayed there, heavy, silent, like everything he was carrying. Have you ever swallowed your pride to reach for someone who pushed you away? Tell us in the comments. On the 3rd day, Cade spoke. The woman is being discharged tomorrow. She has nowhere to go. The landlord evicted her while she was in the hospital, 3 months behind on rent. Josiah sat behind his desk in the penthouse. Beyond the glass walls, Chicago at night glittered as if the city didn't know that somewhere a woman was about to walk out of a hospital with a 4-year-old child and no roof over their heads. I know. Cade looked at him. You know? I've been monitoring the situation. Silence. Long. Cade stood there without asking more, because he knew Josiah Crane never said I've been monitoring the situation unless he had followed every detail, every development, every breath. For 3 days he hadn't gone to the hospital, yet he knew what Lena had eaten, what Bria had drawn, which nurse worked the night shift, and at what hour the landlord taped the eviction notice to the door of apartment 4B. He knew everything, because he couldn't not know. Cade left. Josiah remained alone. He opened the desk drawer. Bria's drawing lay there beside the dried jasmine flower, beside the old phone. 3 things belonging to another life. A life he had once had and lost and just found again, and was now losing once more. He picked up the old phone, opened the messages, began to type. Josiah Crane wasn't a man who typed slowly. He gave orders in 3 words. Signed contracts with a single stroke. But tonight he typed slowly. Each letter deliberate, because every word he placed down was a fragment of himself he wasn't used to exposing. I know I don't have the right, but Bria mentioned the park on Maple Street. I have a place. Clean, warm, quiet, no conditions. She shouldn't lose her home because I stepped in and complicated everything. That's on me. He stared at the message. Read it once, then again. And he realized it was the first time in 5 years he had written something that wasn't an order, wasn't a threat, wasn't a number. It was a request. He sent it, set the phone down, and sat very still, more vulnerable than he had been in 5 years. Because Josiah Crane could endure bullets, endure betrayal, endure loneliness. But waiting for a woman to answer a message she might never answer was a pain he had no armor for. At St. Mercy General, Lena read the message 4 times. She sat on the hospital bed in her discharge clothes, jeans, and the sweater Bria had chosen at a thrift store 2 weeks earlier. Brown hair loosely tied back, and read it 4 times. The first time with her eyes, the second with her mind, the third with her heart. The fourth with 5 years of memory, 5 years of cold nights, 5 years of looking into her daughter's eyes and seeing him. She thought about every decision she had ever made in the name of survival. The night she walked out of the apartment 2 months pregnant. The night she gave birth to Bria alone. The night she pulled out her IV and barricaded the hospital door. She wasn't a woman who needed rescuing. She knew that. The question wasn't, do I need him? The question was, does Bria need a father? She thought of Josiah sitting in a plastic chair all night for a child he hadn't known was his. Of his rough hands trying to tie Bria's hair. Of the drawing My Family he had folded carefully into his coat pocket. Of the dried jasmine flower he had kept for 5 years. She picked up the phone. Called. Josiah answered before the second ring ended. They were silent for a few seconds. Her breathing through the line, his breathing on the other end. 5 years apart, and now separated only by a wire thinner than a strand of hair. I looked into you myself, Lena said. Before those files came, I already knew. Silence. Then Josiah asked, his voice very soft. Then why did you let me in? Because knowing what a person is, and knowing who a person is, aren't the same thing, she exhaled. I'm afraid. I'm still afraid. But this morning Bria asked me why the world makes people hard. She's 4, Josiah. She shouldn't even know how to ask that question at her age. Long silence on his end. She's extraordinary, Josiah said, his voice so low it was almost breath. I know. Lena drew in a slow breath. I'm not saying yes to anything. I'm saying don't disappear from her life. She chose you. I don't understand why. But I won't fight that. A pause. And Josiah, she deserves to know who you are. To her. Silence. He understood. Lena was telling him to let Bria know he was her father. He didn't answer in words. But in the 42nd floor penthouse, in the frozen Chicago night, for the first time in 5 years, Josiah Crane felt something he had forgotten the shape of. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope. The apartment sat on a quiet street, 2 blocks from Maple Park. Not extravagant, not cold, not a 42-floor penthouse. Just a clean, warm place with a wide kitchen, a working fireplace, windows overlooking bare trees waiting for spring. Josiah had chosen it carefully, not with money, with something he had almost forgotten how to use. Care. Bria ran through the door first, ran on small legs in worn shoes, Button swinging in her hand, spinning in a circle in the middle of the living room with her arms stretched wide. "Mama, it smells good in here." Lena stood in the doorway, and she laughed. Not the strained laugh she had worn for 5 years, the kind that wrung something out of her so Bria wouldn't see her break, but a real laugh. It rose from her chest, sudden and light, as if her body had forgotten it knew how to laugh like that until it simply did. Josiah stood outside the door, didn't step in. His arms hung at his sides, his back straight, his face composed, standing on the line between hallway and home, as if an invisible wall stood there, and he wasn't certain he was allowed to cross it. Bria ran back, took his hand in both of her tiny ones, pulled. "You have to come in. You're in the picture." Josiah looked at Lena over Bria's head. Lena held his gaze for a long moment. She didn't nod, didn't say, "Come in." She simply stepped aside, and the space she created was the only invitation he needed. He stepped across the threshold, and when he did, his eyes fell on the kitchen table, a small glass jar. Inside, 3 fresh jasmine flowers, white, soft, lightly fragrant. He had placed them there before the two of them arrived. Lena saw the jar. Her steps slowed. Her hand reached out, brushing a petal. Her fingers trembled. She said nothing. She didn't need to, because the dried jasmine he had kept for 5 years and the fresh jasmine he placed on the table today said everything. The days that followed carried something this apartment had never held before. Laughter. Josiah came every evening after work, sat on the living room floor drawing with Bria. His drawings were still terrible. Bria still criticized them, but she kept every picture he made in a cardboard box under her bed, as if they were treasures. And then came the night Josiah read Bria a bedtime story for the first time. He sat on the edge of her bed, a children's book about a small bear open in his hands, and began to read, in his voice, his boss voice, the voice that made 12 districts tremble, the voice that gave orders, passed judgment, made senators say sir. Once upon a time, there was a little bear who lived in the forest. He read it like he was announcing third-quarter earnings. Bria stared at him, eyes wide. Then she laughed. Laughed until she rolled on the pillow, Button falling to the floor, her legs kicking against the blanket. Bears don't talk like that. Josiah looked at her laughing, and something in his chest loosened. He tried again, softened his tone. It still sounded like a mafia boss reading a fairy tale. Bria laughed until she hiccuped. In the kitchen, Lena bit her lip, hands gripping the counter, trying not to laugh with her, but her shoulders shook. He finished the book in entirely the wrong voice, and Bria listened to every word with a smile that never faded. Then she yawned, closed her eyes, and fell asleep with Button on her chest, in a warm room, on a clean bed, for the first time in her life. 1 week later, an ordinary evening, Josiah sat on the floor drawing, Bria beside him, crayons scattered everywhere. Lena stood in the kitchen making chicken porridge. Real porridge. Not thin because money was short, but thick and fragrant, because for the first time, she cooked in a warm kitchen with a refrigerator full of food. Bria was coloring, not looking up, and asked in the most ordinary voice in the world, as casually as asking if it might rain. "Mr. Josiah, are you my daddy?" The crayon stopped moving. The kitchen went still. Lena froze, spoon in hand, her back to the living room. "My friend at the hospital said I have eyes like yours. And sometimes Mama looks at you the way she looks at the picture she cries over." Josiah glanced toward the kitchen. Lena turned halfway. Her eyes met his, and she nodded, slightly, almost invisible. But he saw it. He looked back at Bria. She sat there holding her crayon, waiting, with the strange patience of a child used to waiting for everything. Yes. Silence. Bria didn't react dramatically. She was quiet. Set the crayon down. "Okay," she said. "A beat. Can I call you Daddy then?" "You can, if you want to." Bria put the crayon aside, stood up, climbed into his lap, her small arms wrapped around his neck, hugged him, said nothing, just held him. With her entire 4-year-old 15-kilogram body, with all her strength and all her absolute trust, without hesitation, without fear, and Josiah Crane, the man the Chicago underworld feared, the man who had walked through burning warehouses without blinking, the man who had buried his pain so deep it turned to stone, sat on the living room floor with a 4-year-old child wrapped around him. And for the first time in 5 years, his eyes filled. He closed them, held her back, tight. The arms that had ordered deaths, strangled enemies, smashed a dashboard, now circled the small body of his daughter and held on as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear. In the kitchen, Lena turned away, both hands gripping the counter, her shoulders shaking, and she cried, not loudly, not even with tears, the kind of crying that comes from someone who has endured too long and is finally allowed to set the weight down. He had walked through fire without blinking. He had buried pain until it hardened into stone, but nothing in this world, prepared him for the weight of his daughter's arms around his neck and the word daddy in her mouth. When was the last time someone called you by the name that mattered most? Tell us in the comments. 3 months later, Chicago spring arrived slowly, as it always did. But this year it arrived differently. Snow melted along the sidewalks of Maple Street. The trees outside the apartment window began to bud with tender green. And Josiah Crane, for the first time in his life, woke in the morning without needing a reason to get out of bed. Because his reason was already sitting at the kitchen table, ladling porridge into bowls, announcing in a 4.5-year-old voice that Button wanted breakfast too. 3 months changed many things. Josiah had stepped away from the empire. Not with a grand declaration, not with explosions or war, but with quiet meetings, gradual transfers, final nods to the men he had led for a decade. Cade was the last person he spoke to. Standing in the penthouse hallway for the final time, Cade asked, "Are you sure?" Josiah looked at the old phone in his hand, the phone that had been silent for 5 years and rang once, and that single ring changed everything. "Don't call me boss anymore." Cade was silent. Then for the first time in 5 years, he almost smiled. "All right, Josiah." The penthouse was sold. The money placed into a trust for Bria that Lena didn't know about, and wouldn't know about until the girl turned 18. Josiah kept nothing from his old life except Cade, who was no longer a bodyguard but a friend, and the old phone, which he still charged every night, not because he was waiting for a call anymore, but because habit had become part of him, like a scar healed yet still visible. Lena was stronger. The pneumonia was gone. She found a new job as a receptionist at a clinic near home. Day shift, modest pay but enough, and she refused every offer of financial help from Josiah except the apartment, because that was for Bria, and Lena Ashford would accept anything for Bria. But she would take care of herself. She had done so for 5 years, and that independence was no longer a burden. It was her backbone. And she laughed more. Not the strained laughter. Laughter that cost nothing. Laughter that burst out when Bria spilled porridge on the table, when Josiah tried to fry eggs and burned the pan, when Bria taught him to tie her hair and he still did it wrong every time but never gave up. The laughter of a woman who had walked through the valley floor and climbed out with her bare hands and now stood in the light. Bria began at a new kindergarten, a small school near Maple Park, a short-haired teacher who smiled often. That morning, the class was asked to draw their family. Bria took out her box of 48 crayons, the same box Josiah had bought at the hospital that day, and began to draw. 3 figures. The small one in the middle holding hands with 2 tall ones. The woman on the left with long hair, smiling. The man on the right, very tall, serious-faced, but holding a stuffed rabbit. Beneath them, in red crayon, Bria wrote, "My family," spelled correctly. No missing letter I, no mistake. 4.5 years old, and she had learned how to spell that word right. And in the corner of the picture, small, easy to miss if you didn't look closely, she drew a flower. 5 petals. White. Jasmine. The teacher studied the drawing. "Who is the tall one, sweetheart?" Bria smiled. "That's my daddy. He looks scary, but he's not. He ties my hair every morning and gets it wrong every time." That afternoon, Josiah stood outside the school gate. Dark coat, serious face, hands in his pockets. Other parents glanced at him, then quickly looked away because there was something in the way he stood that made people instinctively keep their distance. He didn't care. He was waiting for one person. The gate opened. Bria ran out. Ran in new shoes, hair tied slightly crooked because Josiah had done it that morning. Button in her backpack. Ran straight to him. Jumped up. He caught her. Lifted her. One arm holding his daughter, the other taking the drawing she thrust proudly toward him. "Daddy, I drew you," Josiah looked at the picture. The third picture. From my family missing the letter I on a hospital floor, to my family spelled correctly in a warm kindergarten classroom. And the jasmine flower in the corner. The jasmine that had once been in Lena's hair 5 years ago, then pressed dry in his drawer, then placed fresh in a jar on the kitchen table. Now a small crayon blossom in the corner of his daughter's family drawing. "What's this, sweetheart?" He pointed to the flower. "Mama said it's very special. She said it smells like the first time she loved you." Josiah stood there outside the kindergarten gate under the Chicago spring sun, one arm holding his daughter, one hand holding a crayon drawing, and he felt something he had forgotten long ago. Whole. Lena stood by the car a few steps away, wind lifting her brown hair. She watched father and daughter, and she smiled. A smile that cost nothing. For the first time in 5 years, the smile of a woman who had walked through darkness and found light, not because someone carried the light to her, but because she had walked far enough to reach it herself. A 4-year-old child had reached into the dark with a misspelled message, and not a trace of fear. She wasn't looking for a mafia boss. Wasn't looking for a father. She was only looking for someone to help her mother. And somehow, along a road no one planned and no one predicted, she found both, and they found their way home. This story reminds us that sometimes love doesn't come from where we expect. It arrives in a wrong message at midnight, in the trembling hands of a 4-year-old child, in a dried jasmine flower kept in a drawer for 5 years. It reminds us that people can change, that every wall has a crack, and that sometimes the one who saves us isn't a superhero, but a tiny child who doesn't even know what fear is. If this story touched you, if your heart feels lighter or heavier after hearing it, we would love to listen. What did you feel? What did this story awaken in your own life? Share it with us in the comments. We read every line and cherish every story you send. If you'd like to hear more stories like this each day, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any video. A like and a share from you will help this story reach more people, more hearts, and perhaps the one person who needs to hear it most. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, peace, and happiness every day. Thank you for being here with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.